At 4:47 on the morning of September 14th, 1967, Robert McClements, Jr. stood at the edge of an open pit excavation 75 kilometers north of Fort McMurray, Alberta, watching the first bucket of oil sands feed into a processing plant that had taken 11 years and $235 million to build. 44 years old, chief engineer, 22 years in petroleum extraction across 4 continents. The material moving through that conveyor belt was not oil, not yet. It was black, cold, and dense enough to hold the shape of a boot print for 6 hours. He had staked his career on the belief that it could be made into something useful. The Great Canadian Oil Sands plant, the first commercial oil sands operation in human history, processed its first barrel of synthetic crude that morning at 6:13 a.m., with a yield from 2 tons of raw bitumen-saturated sand, 1 barrel of oil. The energy required to produce it, equivalent to half a barrel burned before the finished product left the facility. The economists said the math didn't work. McClements said the math wasn't finished yet. The Athabasca deposit had been known for centuries. The Cree and Dean peoples of the region had used the bitumen-saturated sands for waterproofing canoes long before any European surveyor arrived. The first written European account came from Peter Pond, a fur trader who documented the black, oil-saturated banks of the Athabasca River in 1778, describing a substance that seeped from the earth in such quantities that it stained the river surface for kilometers downstream. Pond did not know what he was looking at. Neither did anyone else for 150 years. The deposit's true scale began to emerge through geological surveys conducted between 1910 and 1940. What those surveys found was not a pool of oil trapped beneath rock, the structure of conventional petroleum deposits. What they found was something without precedent in commercial extraction: a sedimentary formation of sand, water, clay, and bitumen extending across 142,000 square kilometers of northern Alberta, buried at depths ranging from surface exposure to 400 meters below grade. The bitumen content of the richest zones, 18% by weight. The total recoverable resource, as estimated by the Alberta Energy Regulator in its 2023 assessment, 165.4 billion barrels. For context, Saudi Arabia's proven conventional reserves total 267 billion barrels, accumulated over geological time in porous limestone formations that release oil under natural pressure when a well is drilled. Athabasca's bitumen does not flow. At ambient temperature, it has the viscosity of cold molasses. It must be mined or heated before it moves. That single physical property, the refusal to flow, defined every technical challenge of the next 100 years. Carl Clark was a physical chemist at the University of Alberta who spent 27 years working on a single problem: how to separate bitumen from sand using hot water. His laboratory at the university, from 1920 to 1947, operated on a budget that rarely exceeded $4,000 per year. His equipment was improvised. His results were reproducible. His process, mixing oil sands with hot water and a small quantity of sodium hydroxide, then allowing the bitumen to float to the surface as a froth, became the technical foundation of every commercial operation built in Athabasca in the following half-century. Clark published his findings openly. He took no patent. He received no royalty from the industry that his process eventually generated. He died in 1966, 1 year before the first commercial plant opened. The Great Canadian Oil Sands operation that McClements oversaw on that September morning used Clark's hot water extraction process, scaled to industrial dimensions. The plant consumed 12,000 tons of oil sands per day. It used 100,000 cubic meters of hot water per day, heated to 80 degrees Celsius. It produced 45,000 barrels of synthetic crude per day, refined on site to remove sulfur and nitrogen compounds. Then pipeline shipped south to Edmonton refineries. And the economics in 1967 were marginal. The price of conventional crude that year was $3.10 per barrel. The production cost at the Great Canadian Oil Sands plant, $3.07 per barrel. The margin, 3 cents. The entire enterprise existed within a range where a single operational disruption could eliminate profitability entirely. If you want to understand how a 3-cent per barrel margin in 1967 became the foundation of the largest industrial project in Canadian history, hit that like button. It helps us bring more stories like this one to the people who need to hear them. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Athabasca. The economics changed on October 17, 1973. The OPEC oil embargo raised the global price of crude from $3 per barrel to $11.65 per barrel in 4 months. The Athabasca Oil Sands, marginal, expensive, yet technically challenging, became competitive overnight. Not marginally competitive, structurally competitive, at a price level that the producing nations of the Middle East had no interest in allowing to fall below. The second major oil sands operation, Syncrude Canada, had been in planning since 1964. Its consortium of investors, a combination of Canadian and American oil companies, had nearly abandoned the project in 1969 when the economics refused to close. After 1973, the project was restructured with provincial and federal government equity participation and restarted. Syncrude began production in 1978. Its initial capacity, 129,000 barrels per day. The combined output of Great Canadian Oil Sands and Syncrude in 1980, 174,000 barrels per day. The deposit was no longer a curiosity. It was a supply source, but the extraction method that defined Athabasca's first commercial phase, open-pit mining, is the most direct approach physically possible. A dragline removes the overburden, the muskeg, clay, and non-bituminous sand sitting above the productive formation. Giant electric shovels with bucket capacities of 100 cubic meters load the oil sands directly into trucks. The trucks used at modern operations, the Caterpillar 797F and the Komatsu 930E, carry payloads of 363 tons per haul cycle. Their tires stand 4 meters tall, a full load of oil sands in a single truck, enough raw material to produce approximately 180 barrels of synthetic crude. The scale of the mining operation is not easily comprehended from a distance. The Syncrude Mildred Lake mine, viewed from altitude, resembles a geological feature. A created canyon system covering 22 square kilometers. Its walls stepped in 15-meter benches, its floor covered in vehicles whose scale only becomes apparent when a person stands beside one. At peak operation, the Alberta oil sands mining operations moved more earth per year than the construction of the Panama Canal. Not historically, per year, every year. Open-pit mining, however, can only access oil sands deposits within approximately 75 meters of the surface. The deposits accessible by surface mining represent 20% of the total Athabasca resource. The remaining 80%, lying at depths between 75 and 400 meters, requires a different approach. Steam-assisted gravity drainage, SAGD. The technique was developed by Roger Butler, a reservoir engineer at Imperial Oil, through theoretical work conducted between 1969 and 1978 and tested in field pilots during the early 1980s. The principle: drill 2 horizontal wells into the bitumen formation, one positioned 5 meters above the other. inject steam continuously into the upper well. The steam heats the surrounding bitumen, reducing its viscosity from solid-like consistency to something that flows. The mobilized bitumen drains by gravity to the lower well, where it is pumped to surface. The steam requirement per barrel of produced bitumen: 2 to 4 barrels of water. Heated to 250 degrees Celsius, injected at pressures between 1,000 and 2,500 kilopascals. SAGD operations leave no surface mine, no drag lines, no truck hauls. A SAGD well pad covers approximately 3 hectares and accesses a reservoir volume of 500 hectares underground. From a highway, the SAGD operation is nearly invisible. A cluster of pipes, separator vessels, and steam generators behind a security fence, surrounded by intact boreal forest. Roger Butler received the Order of Canada in 2000. He died in 2005. The technique he developed now produces more than 1.3 million barrels per day from the Athabasca Formation, more than the entire Canadian oil sands output at the time of his death. The Athabasca Oil Sands today operate at a combined production level of 3.3 million barrels per day. This figure makes Canada the 4th largest oil-producing nation in the world, behind the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Russia. Of Canada's total production, approximately 83% originates from the oil sands. The industry directly employs 149,000 workers. It contributes $10.9 billion annually in royalties and taxes to the Alberta and federal governments. The carbon intensity of oil sands production has declined 29% per barrel since 2000, driven by improvements in SAGD steam efficiency, cogeneration of electricity from waste heat, and reductions in methane venting. The absolute emissions of the industry have increased over the same period as production volumes have grown. The two facts coexist without canceling each other. Engineers describe this as the efficiency paradox of a growing system. The challenges that remain are neither geological nor technical. The bitumen is there. The extraction methods work. The pipelines carry the product. The refineries process it. What remains contested in regulatory proceedings, in international climate negotiations, and in the financial decisions of institutional investors, is the question of how long the world's demand for the product justifies the continuation of its production. That question has no engineering answer. Robert McClements Jr. left the great Canadian oil sands operation in 1971. He returned to the United States, where he continued working in petroleum engineering until his retirement in 1984. He did not become famous. His name does not appear on the plaques at the Oil Sands Discovery Center in Fort McMurray. The bucket that carried the first commercial load of Athabasca Oil Sands into the extraction plant on September 14, 1967, was eventually retired from service and placed on display at the Syncrude Canada facility. Most visitors take photographs of it. Carl Clark's original hot water extraction apparatus, the laboratory-scale equipment he used to prove the process between 1920 and 1947 on a $4,000 annual budget, is preserved at the University of Alberta. It sits in a display case in the Department of Chemical and Materials Engineering. Undergraduate students walk past it every day on their way to lectures on enhanced oil recovery and carbon capture. The deposit beneath the boreal forest of northeastern Alberta contains 165.4 billion barrels of recoverable bitumen. At current production rates, it represents 137 years of output. The forest above it covers an area larger than England. The industry that extracts from it has reclaimed 1,104 hectares of disturbed land to certified equivalent capability since reclamation requirements were first enforced. 104 hectares odds against 895 square kilometers of current surface disturbance. The math is not finished yet. If this story showed you something about where Canada's energy actually comes from, hit that like button. Every like tells YouTube to put this in front of more people. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We're documenting the systems beneath this country's surface. The oil sands, the pipelines, the power lines, the railways. The infrastructure that, if it stopped, Canada would stop. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if you've worked in the oil sands, if you've driven through Fort McMurray, if you've seen those trucks from the highway and wondered what they were carrying. You're not just a viewer. You're part of the record. Thank you for watching.